moss. It adds character to your models, and it's a great way to show age. In this tutorial, we are going to learn how to quickly add moss to any materials in Blender. Here's a simple clay material made from Southern Shorty's wonderful tutorial. You can use any of your materials to follow along. We'll be using Eevee, but it works on Cycles as well. First, we are going to create a pattern that tells Blender where to add the moss. We are going to use a Voronoi texture for that. Make sure you have the Node Wrangler enabled, so you can preview the textures by pressing Ctrl-Shift and clicking on the node itself. We will be using the Voronoi's color output. Right now, it looks nothing like a moss. So, we add a noise texture onto the vector to drive the vector of the Voronoi. Now, if you ramp up the details in the noise, you can see that the Voronoi texture starts to take on a bit of a moss-like appearance. You can increase the roughness by a bit to accentuate the pattern. Add a texture coordinate so we can use this texture on any models. For this tutorial, we're going to use the object coordinate, but you can also use the UV coordinate if your object is unwrapped. Now, add a color ramp node after the Voronoi texture. This will be the mask that we use to tell Blender where we want our moss to be at. Move both stops closer to each other to get a better contrast. This allows us to see how the pattern looks like as we tweak the Voronoi and the noise texture to get the moss that we want. The Voronoi scale controls how much our moss creeps. Do note that the pattern is cyclical because the Voronoi vector is driven by a noise texture. I generally stick within a range of 4 to 5. There we go. The noise scale controls the frequency distribution of the moss around the model. A low noise scale creates more clumped together patches, while a higher noise scale creates smaller patches distributed across the model. For this example, I'm going for something clumped together. Say like this. Alright, now let's move these two stops closer together to create a cleaner mask. To mix the moss with the existing material, we use a Mix RGB node. The moss setup is used as the factor to create a mask for the moss. The moss will be at whichever input that corresponds to the black part of the mask. Now, just using a single color is a little boring and totally not moss-like. So, make a copy of the moss setup. Make sure to link it to the texture coordinates. Copy the color. Make one of the stops lighter. And connect this to the moss color input. Now, if we play around with the Voronoi scale, we get a nice variation in color around the border of the moss. You can even swap them around if you want them to be different, depending on what you want. So, we have patches with a nice mossy color, but it looks a bit flat. Add a bump node and feed the black and white color ramp into the bump node's height. If your material has existing bump nodes, attach those to the normal input of this node. The moss bump will be the last bump in the stack. Right now, the moss bump is sunken. Check invert on the moss's bump node. There we go. Now it sticks out like moss. To add roughness for the moss, repeat the same step with the moss color. Add a mixed RGB. Connect the moss mask to the factor. Connect the existing roughness. Now we can customize the roughness of the moss. You can use the mapping's rotation to move the moss around. You can play with the location, change the pattern of the moss, or just tweak the scale if you want to mess with the shape a bit. Copy and paste the node setup to other materials to apply the moss to it. If you found this useful, do leave a like and subscribe. It helps the channel a lot.